Kwekwe, Mino Pajashig. Welcome to Indigenous Insights. Monique Manatch, Indigenous. Kidikanik Anishinabek and Dojiba. My name is Monique Manatch, and I'm a member of the Algonquins of Aerial Lake. And today, we are really fortunate. I've got so many questions for you, Aerial. We're talking with Aerial Sunday-Cardinal, and you're from Whitefish, but it's also called Goodfish First Nation?
Yeah, it has two names. So Whitefish Lake, number 128, and Goodfish Lake.
That's because I'm from Algonquins of Barrier Lake, but also known as Rapid Lake. And that was kind of like where the people were before the reserve, and then where they were moved to, which was actually a man-made lake. Rapid Lake was a river, but they flooded it and called it Rapid Lake and put us all on there. So you are a performance artist, you're a singer, a dancer, a painter, a sculptor, photographer, you write poetry, you're screenwriting. There's so many things you do. It's so incredible. I love it. Cooking and beading.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you about that short film you did recently, 4620. What was that about?
Yeah, so last year I was working on a short film. My friend Andre Liskov, who's a cinematographer, came out to my reservation to join me, and we it was kind of free flowing at first because I didn't write a screenplay, and we figured that okay, well, we'll kind of make it documentary style. And the way it sort of started turning towards the things that people started talking about were about the prophecies that we have about the end of times, and seeing, the fires and the floods and earthquakes and droughts as markers to the end of times. A lot of people will say that as Indigenous people, we've already survived an apocalypse, though these I wanted to say catastrophes. These I don't know the right word for it, but it's an ongoing destruction of our land, and the way that we can relate to the land, and therefore an ongoing destruction to our culture, our people. So in that way, seeing the end of times occurring, and how we feed into that through our actions.
We have in my community, I'm Algonquin, and there was an elder, William Commanda, would talk about these prophecies as well. And a lot of it had to do with the flooding. A lot of it had to do along the East Coast specifically. And now we're seeing it. And it always puts me in mind of, it's not Mother Earth that is going to die, because Mother Earth can get along quite well without us. Thank you very much. So it's not about, the earth. It's about what's happening to human beings and what we've done to ourselves. And those are the ends of time. And it's funny because I've recently been having this conversation with people about how it's the people that are impacted, but also how we've already been through an apocalypse. That the Indigenous nations have already faced this. So these extinction level events that have occurred to us already when settlers came and decimated our populations simply through the diseases. I mean, we didn't even need to be in contact with a settler for that disease to be spread through our communities. There were millions of us, millions. And yeah, I know in Algonquin, I've been told that there were millions. And now, by the turn of the century, we were down to maybe 2,000. That's how many people, And I'm sure it was the same thing in your community.
We had sicknesses. Yeah, I don't hear that spoken about too often, about the diseases and or what was carried on through our blankets. I hear about it briefly, um, but maybe it's yeah, it's not spoken about often.
When you talk about apocalypse, you're talking about what's happening now. Is this reflected in your work? How do you, what sorts of things do you reflect in your work?
It it depends. It changes. Um, if we're talking about the short film, what's reflected is well, it was a documentary style. The first take, I still want to go back and re-edit it into something a bit more cinematic and something a bit more with a storyline, a bit more going into fiction. But the first take that we worked on, um, I was looking for knowledge keepers, um, those who live closely with the land. So I'd captured some people who work with hides, hunters. There was a bit of medicine picking in the film. Um, what else? We were given permission to film people preparing for ceremony. Of course, we're not allowed to videotape the actual ceremony or the lodge, but we had gotten permission to videotape the Oscapio sock, the helpers cutting down willows um, to then add to the lodge later. We'd also captured some of the women inside preparing feast food, taking care of the children. Um, I was wanting to capture how we in our community, I'd filmed both in Goodfish Lake and Saddle Lake, which is a neighboring reserve. Um, I was going to mention it earlier, but Goodfish Lake and Saddle Lake used to be one reserve, but had split apart. So adding to Whitefish Lake, Goodfish Lake, and then Saddle Lake, it's all kind of combined in there. But filming on both of these reserves, people who still live with traditional knowledge and carry out our traditions. It's an interesting topic. I wanted to touch on our natural laws because that's what people are living in accordance to when they are living in a traditional way. And very simply, when we're not living in accordance to our natural laws, that's when we go off path. And that's when we start to see imbalances and disharmony and harm, either with ourselves or other people or the earth. So I don't remember exactly what I had written up for the description of my film, but it was something like a short documentary providing an insight to and reminder of Nehiao values and traditions as we face the end of times.
That's amazing. That's I really like that idea of like how do we incorporate our values, our, you know, as we face this huge of events, this prophetic future, you know, how do we maintain and well reclaim, and because so there's so much hope, there's so much the reclamation, the you know, there's that, I don't want to say pride, but there's that feeling of you know, really incorporating those values and those activities into our lives. And how do you and when faced with overwhelming odds, so how do people talk about that? What are some of the things that they say when they're thinking about this sort of thing?
For us, it comes down to free will and um, that we have a choice to make the right decision. um, and that we have been given the answers of how to make the right decisions. And then that just comes down to, whatever kind of Indigenous person you are, learning what those natural laws are in your own traditions. And
You've worked somewhat with the digital, creating a film, using photography. How do you find these values? How do you incorporate them into that practice? And when you're looking at how knowledge is transferred, or how our values, how do you see them? How do we pivot them? How do we use them online or in a digital form?
first, when I was getting the ideas of making this film, I'd gone and prayed for it in the sweat lodge. So I offered prints, and because um, out of my own heart of wanting things to be done in a good way and having respect for um, not only the people who come in my life as teachers, but the teachings themselves. I want to be able to do it I want to be able to share and capture and present myself and the knowledge and the people that I represent in an honorable way. And so I take it on as a responsibility. So I first I went and gone to pray about it in the sweat lodge, and because of the things that I wanted to talk about in this film and the topics that I wanted to the questions I wanted to ask people, they're having to do with our teachings, they're sacred. So that was one of the first things I did. The second thing was the people I'd gone to interview or I wanted to record. I had gone and gave them tobacco, and which is a very common practice over here. Um, I'm living out in Vancouver right now, and there isn't as much tobacco offerings out there as protocol, but over here, um, it's pretty standard procedure. So that was the second thing I did. I went and offered tobacco. To me, this is active embodiment of what our traditions are, what our protocols are, what it means to be Cree Nehiao. During that preparation, and it wasn't even a second thought for me to be doing these steps, but it's what I felt was the right thing to do. And for I could speak for Cree, Plains Cree people, it has to do with the protocols behind knowledge transfer. For us, that has to do with offering tobacco to who we're going to be speaking to, who are asking questions from, and then also asking permission of what can be shared. And there was two things that came up. So I'd filmed the Escapio Sock, which are the helpers, in ceremony, the men who help in ceremony. I was filming them cutting down willows, and the man whose ceremony it was, Ben Steinhauer, I'd gone and offered him tobacco to ask if I could film the Escapio Sock. And he said, yes, I support you. And he had also shared with me that the reason why we don't film our lodges, or at least one of the reasons why, is because that's not how we're meant to be learning. People want quick access to knowledge, but we have steps in how we acquire our traditional knowledge, and that has to do with the very first step of offering tobacco, but also being there in person, spending time with the people or with the ceremony or with the plant or whatever you're trying to learn, with the songs, spending time and being there. And there's a process to learning. And when people get it very quickly, they may not fully understand the significance or the full teachings, or it might be misused. And this is what he shared, and also mentioned that we're meant to be there in ceremony, and that's how we're meant to learn how to conduct ourselves in ceremony, how to conduct the ceremony itself. And if we're not there, then we're not going to learn. But that was our free will, that was our choice not to be there.
Oh, that's really interesting, because I've heard people, that is very much what people say about not using technology, is that the way that we learned was through relationship, and that by using technology, we're disrupting that relationship. I have to ask, though, because so many of our elders are passing on, and everybody's a walking library because of the way that we transfer knowledge, the oral tradition of storytelling and of building relationship. If we are able to record people talking, and to not ceremony, and that's something that I think everybody agrees on, but if we can record them, then this is a way that we can continue to transfer the knowledge to the next generations, simply because when those people are gone, that knowledge is gone with them. So what would you say to people who expressed it in that way?
Yeah, it's going to be up to each elder, I think, what they want to share. Some will probably stay as far away from a camera as possible. And others might agree that things need to be, recorded as much as they can. I don't know too much about intellectual property rights. That's one thing that comes up into my head, is that there needs to be more Indigenous ownership of our knowledge. I know that a lot of knowledge keepers that I know are very careful about where, for instance, a video would be archived. And like, for instance, a lot of them want to stay away from universities because of the intellectual property rights or protocol, or the that whatever goes into a university becomes their property, so they can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah, that's so true. Universities will take ownership. And then it's, for me, a lot of the knowledge, I call it stewardship. Communities will have stewardship. They're responsible for it, and how it's used and where it goes. And in my community, it's the stories and the songs, not so much images, but stories and songs that we can share. However, the stewardship of that story belongs with the community, and not. I've had teachers say that they want to use it in classrooms, and I have to say, well, I can't, because I don't have the right to let that story out. I can tell the story, but they want me to write it down, and then they want, to use it. And my response is always, you need to bring in an elder. I'm a knowledge carrier, but I'm not an elder. And you need to have that. It's all the teachings, it's everything that goes around that. So that all the protocols have to be in place. And most of the time in the larger institutions, they don't want to do that. They just want a class and they want to, draw a picture. They don't understand the meaning or the depth or the layers of what that story is about and the cultural principles.
Mm-hmm.
In your work, do you run up against that there may be, if you're painting or if you're performing maybe a story or a song, do you run up against, like, what kind of protocols do you find that you need to be aware of, or permissions that you need to gain in order to create your own work?
I always try to ask people that I trust what their thoughts on what I want to share are. So one of those people being Dr. Diana Steinhauer, and she's a knowledge keeper and somebody that I've gone to refer to, or she's also just a woman who strongly embodies our teachings. So sometimes I don't even have to ask about her. I just think about it and I'm like, what would Diana do? um yeah, there's a lot that I have to keep out of my artwork. I definitely wouldn't be like, I know that there's things that I wouldn't be allowed to share in artwork in a public setting, and that used to be a bit like painful or sad for me because I'm like, well, these are the things that I find so important and that they've had such a huge impact on me, but uh yeah, it's not the place for them to be shared. The one thing I wanted to mention when you were speaking about universities and the classroom, I really think going forward that we should have more, again, like Indigenous owned institutions. Is that the right word? um, for example, you see like Blue Quills University in Alberta here, or there's also the Yellowhead Community College, Tribal College, which are Indigenous owned universities and colleges that share our teachings, and we'll have in those classrooms our stories, our ceremonies. Blue Quills in particular is quite, I think, is a university that people should model off of in other universities. I'm going to UBC at the moment, and there's very little representation of West Coast Indigenous peoples and their teachings. Even when we talk about decolonization, which I think is really interesting, that there's a lot of these instructors at the university who are talking about decolonization, but don't represent the West Coast peoples and their teachings. I think that's kind of the first step, is having a re-indigenization of the peoples of where you are.
That's the first step, absolutely. That you have to be like, if you're in is it Haida territory there, or Musqueam?
This is Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam.
Then that's where you need to start, and pedagogy as well. How courses are taught, the content, land-based, looking at how, because context needs to be prioritized. The context of whose land you're on. Like that's huge. That's the first.
Mm-hmm.
It's ironic that they're not ironic. It's worse. It's horrible that they don't recognize that.
I don't want to bash them too much. I still go to school there. But um and but I'm also glad that these conversations are still that they are taking place, because that's also a huge change in these recent times where these conversations can happen.
And they're not the only one. I go to Carleton, not recognizing Algonquin territory There's little bits, little pockets, but for the most part, I'm not seeing it. Not the way it should be. Maybe that's just a personal opinion, maybe not the way I think it should be done. But yeah, having that recognition and bringing in more than one elder who is from the territory, that kind of thing. Like, yeah, and I've heard it said of many other universities as well. It's common.
Yeah. So with the Indigenous ownership, I think that there should be more Indigenous universities like the University of Blue Quill that takes the knowledge of those peoples of the land or uses, or it's Indigenous owned, so it's not taking or using, it's just it's being taught. But because it's Indigenous owned, it's protected and but keeps our peoples alive.
Exactly, and it's taught in the manner um, of the people of the area. Like when I was saying about land-based learning, the way that people learn, schools are set up for what they call the mental learner, where someone stands and then lectures. And nobody really learns that. Nobody, not Indigenous people, not mainstream people. Nobody hardly ever learns that way. Well, I mean, part of it, but physically doing something, well, to learn, building relationship to learn, having that emotional attachment. Like these are all various ways that are more prominent in Indigenous learning. So having a university that's set up to honor those different ways of learning. I used to work at First Nations Technical Institute in Tyendinaga, and that was an Indigenous-run post-secondary institute. And I learned so much when I was there. I was there for about 7 years, and all the things that I realized in areas where I didn't do well in school, I you could all of a sudden you can see where you would excel because of the way that it's being presented. And I think you're right about the institutions, that they need to be for Indigenous people in the way that we learn.
Mm.
Do you find that? So have you been to Blue Quill? Do you ever take courses there? Or?
Yeah, they often have culture camps, so I go there for that. I had been invited to share a bit of my journeys in one of the culture camps. I was invited by Shirley Hunter. And then aside from that, I have also taken Cree courses and also a course with Diana Steinhauer, but I don't remember the name of the course. I think either women's teachings and governance, something along those lines.
That's amazing to have that opportunity. I'd love to be able to take courses like that. That would just be fantastic. We
Mm-hmm.
need them here. We need more of that here. I'm in Ottawa, in Algonquin territory. Absolutely. When you were sharing your journey, what sort of things were you sharing?
I, for a while, really lived I don't know what kind of life, how to call it, nomadic, but also very alternative lifestyle. Um, a, a alternative to the mainstream lifestyle. I, at, at the time, was really interested in learning how to live off of the land, and I wanted to learn a lot about plant medicines and healing work because of my own spiritual gifts. I took it really seriously because my heart was and is, although sometimes I don't make the best decisions in terms of sustainability. And so at the time, I took it really seriously and was living very naturally and just wanted to learn how to live off the land. I had also wanted to learn more about women's teachings and how to heal as a woman and what it meant to be a woman because I didn't grow up with my mom after 11. I believe she was in a car accident. She'd survived, and she's actually out in Ottawa. We were out in Ottawa at the time, living there. But she was in a car accident with my stepdad, and they'd both um, it was pretty serious. So they'd both gotten half of their body paralyzed and brain damage, and are permanently handicapped. So after the age of 11, I didn't live with my mom or grow up with my mom. So I had those questions of what does it mean to be a woman? And to me, it made the most sense to find the answers in the Cree teachings. And I've always been very grateful that I have those roots to return to, because not everybody does, or they're displaced, or even like with European people, they have roots, but they're displaced. They're over here.
And disconnected. There's a lot more disconnection in mainstream from the land. So you're right, they're not on their own territory, but also the idea of being connected to land is more foreign than for us. Can I ask you something personal?
Yeah.
Is your mom's name Beverly?
Yes.
I knew your mom. I know your mom. She was a personal trainer at the Odawa Friendship Center. I
Yes.
took courses with her. She was actually helping me. She was a woman. I should have recognized the smile. Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, she was amazing. Like, she was just so kind and so generous.
Yeah, she was a very, very bright light, very motivational person.
Is she still in Ottawa?
She's still in Ottawa. Yeah. She's doing okay. Not much has changed too much in the progress of her healing. I mean, she graduated from speech therapy and has always been, I think she's been in physio for the most part, and very determined to be mobile, though she still struggles a lot with her disability, of course, and it could be really hard for her to relate to people because of her brain damage. But she's taken care of, which is good. She's sheltered, or she it sounds a bit bad. She has a roof over her head. She's taken care of. She gets the things that she needs, eats well. But hopefully this year we'll see. We could get her into some ceremonies that can help with her disability. Yeah, it's always a bit of a challenge to get her to travel, because she often needs some extra assistance. I can't imagine having a disability. It's for the strong, very strong souls.
She's teaching us in another way.
Mm-hmm.
Determination. That was definitely, she was on fire at Adawa. Like, she brought participation in there. She was accomplishing so many things. I think it was kind of freaking them out, actually. Like, oh my God, what's she doing? What's she doing now? I don't know if she would remember me, but if you're ever speaking with her, like, I don't like, but I always think very fondly of her.
Yeah, she has a pretty bad memory, but I'll let her know that some of the words that you said, it'll mean a lot to her.
She's remarkable. Absolutely. She's such a role model for people.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So did you start learning more from your dad's side?
So after the car accident, I moved back to Alberta, and it took me a while to get more into ceremonies and living traditionally, just because my father's side of the family has a lot of intergenerational trauma, and there was a lot of chaos. But yes, my father's side of the family carried a bit more of the beliefs and teachings and interest in our traditional ways. My mom was adopted into a family that was more Christian. And although my kokam, she knew how to live off the land. She could hunt, she can fish, she can go pick all the medicines, but her beliefs were more Christian. I know that moving back to my reserve influenced my path a lot in returning back to my teachings and my Cree identity.
Absolutely. That's wonderful that you were able to connect with that. I know what you mean. My family's the same. They lived off the land, Um, However, heavily influenced by the Catholic Church. My reserve is in Quebec, so there was a lot of that. It wasn't until I was older that I started learning some more of like, the stories. I mean, they lived off the land, but it was not taught to me in a way that this is cultural or this is your Indigenous way. You know, it was just everyday life. You know, the reserve has still to this day has no store. You know, the school only goes to grade 6. There's a school and a band office and a health center, and that's it. It's on 59 acres. So two things. One, it made people stay more connected to the land because they needed to in order to survive. Because you couldn't just go to the dépanneur. Like you had to, if you wanted meat, if you wanted, to eat, people still connected to the land and lived off the land. And it kept the language alive more. But on the other hand, too, again, it's a very small reserve. There's no employment. And the Catholic Church was built before the people were moved onto that reserve. So heavily influenced by the Catholic Church. So, ceremony, and I mean, they're bringing that stuff back. I've noticed a big change in the last, say, 20, 25 years. But it's hard. It's a long road. You must have been, like your mom, very determined.
Yeah, I mean, my late uncle used to say that he saw the same light in me as my mom, and always such a huge compliment because she was a woman that I really looked up to. By the way, I feel so warm that you know my mom.
Well, I'm so glad to
It's
connect with
nice.
you because I always had a real soft spot for her.
Mm.
Um, I'm so glad we've been able to connect. I feel like, yeah, I feel so much better knowing and talking to you and knowing how she is um, and being able to connect. That's incredible. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's nice when those things happen.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
What I was sharing at Blue Quills at the culture camp, at the time, was taking doula studies, learned a lot, but was really interested in the spiritual and sacred ways of taking care of women and birth and the ceremonies that happen after. Because I was just returning to my reserve, I didn't know who to ask about those teachings. There was one woman, and this is when I started getting connected to Dr. Diana Steinhauer. There was one woman, and that was her, who I knew carried these teachings. And I reached out to her. I reached out to her over Facebook asking if I think if she could share these teachings with me, or if she knew who I could ask. And she didn't respond. And I wasn't offended, but I don't think at the time I didn't understand. Later on, it dawned on me, and I understood that that's not the way that we're meant to go ask these knowledge keepers. Um, and so, anyways, because she didn't respond, and I didn't know who else to turn to or ask, I was like, well, I had visited Mexico quite a few times, and I know that there's traditional midwives down there. So I think I'll just go back down to Mexico and find a traditional midwife and ask if I could shadow her. I ended up going down there and took kind of another detour because my friend who I was staying with, she saw all the books that I had, my doula books, my plant medicines, acupuncture, et cetera. And um, she's like, wow, like I'm really wanting to learn more about, you know, birth and women's health. Um, there's a midwife this is my friend saying, there's a midwife that I met in Guatemala. And Ariel, if you want to go learn from her, let's go. We could go like next week. and turned out that she couldn't join me because she was a business owner. She was running a restaurant and just got very busy. But she said, "Hey, I'll give you their contact information. If you still want to go, you should go and find them. Go to Guatemala and learn from them." And that's what I ended up doing. I even debated staying there because they had a midwifery school, because so much of what I was learning and the way that the Mayan people still carry their traditions and they're still very connected to their ancient practices and the land and the ceremonies and their spiritual beliefs and their spiritual way of life. It was just how I wanted to be living. And the land is so lush there still that it's possible to be living that way for the most part. Of course, there's the other side of Guatemala, which is a lot of poverty. But because I was feeling so connected to it. And Indigenous teachings, although there shouldn't be an umbrella, but there's so much similarities between our teachings because it's just how we are relating to land. Yeah, so I was going to stay there. My Spanish was good enough at the time that I could have gone to the school and studied midwifery. But I figured that I had my own roots to return to that I didn't know much about yet. And I still had, gaps to fill in, that I wanted to return back home and learn everything that I was learning in Guatemala, but in the Cree way. So our plant medicines, how do we heal ourselves either in ceremony or with plant medicines, with food? How do we take care of women, of families, of children? What are the ceremonies that take place? What are our initiations, rites of passage?
So you came back, and did you reconnect? Did you manage to connect with the elder?
Mm-hmm. So that's when I started forming more of a relationship with Diana and others. Again, mostly in Saddle Lake, Goodfish Lake. Even though they were one reserve, they had split apart because the chief of Goodfish wanted to. His beliefs were more Christian, and there were others that didn't agree with him. Traditionalists that wanted to still live in the Cree way and with their spiritual practices, so they formed another group, and that became Saddle Lake. So you'll still see it in the present day, where Goodfish Lake has more of Christian practices, aren't as involved in traditional culture, although it's slowly coming back. But Saddle Lake has more of those traditional practices. So that's where I was able to make more connections with people to learn our teachings and also to be in ceremony.
I'm curious how you connected eventually with Diane.
The very first time that we met, I met her at a ceremony that she was having at her house. And I just hitched a ride with somebody from my reserve because they were like, "Oh, there's this ceremony going on. Do you want to come join?" And I said, "Yes." And so we went. And then shortly after, she was going to a Sundance ceremony. And I think I just had asked if I could join. So we gone and we spent a few days there. I was also friends with her son. She has a son that's about my age. And he's also involved in ceremony and in culture. So whenever there was a sweat lodge at their house, or I think even just like being friends with him and hanging around the family, I was able to build more of a relationship, and ended up building relationships with more family members. And whenever I wanted to speak with Diana, she was open to it. She's usually a very busy woman because she's also a teacher at the university and goes and does talks and then goes to ceremony, and then of course has her own personal life. But whenever I wanted to talk to her, or I had a question, or she was there to offer support, and yeah, we just, I think, actually built a relationship.
I'm so impressed after, I mean, so many kids would have gone in a different direction. And yet you turn to your culture and to the language. And that is so remarkable. I'm actually just blown away, really, by the path you've chosen and your determination to stick with it. Where did you learn about doula? How did you learn? Did you go to school for midwifery?
I had done online courses to become a doula, and then I was also taking some other, it was like a program that was offered for Indigenous doulas. And then, of course, learning from the midwife down south. But I have not gone to midwifery school.
Have you been at the bedside?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was working as a doula in my community. So there were some of the young women there that I had supported through their pregnancy and their labor and a bit of postpartum.
It's such an incredible. I mean, I've had a son, so I know, but there wasn't really the option when I had him to have, and plus I was older. So doing anything sort of the natural way, or I mean, not going to a hospital, they told me just wasn't an option. That I had to because of my age and I was diabetic. So I had wanted that. I had wanted that Indigenous knowledge with me. I wasn't living in my own territory, so that was tough too because not being a part of the community, but it was difficult to make those connections. So seeing that practice has grown now, and that there's again a reclamation of that natural knowledge and ways that's really hopeful. For the next generations of women coming up. I know how important that is. There's a committee I sit on um, that's one of their main focuses is midwifery, and also along with that, women's health and rights of Indigenous women to determine their own, have agency over their own bodies and what is done to them. Because the opposite end of that, of course, is the forced sterilization, which still occurs, and getting legislation against it, and which they're finally doing. Surprisingly, it's taken this long. But it's hopeful again because this legislation is coming into effect. But to see that this reclamation is occurring right across Canada with the Indigenous community is incredible. It's not something that I mean, I grew up in the '60s, right, in the '70s, so to see how far we've come now, and it's because of the work of people like you know, and your generation, and the women who held on to this. My grandmother was a doula; she was a midwife, and what she spoke about was how a lot of women wouldn't do the work, wouldn't do it, because if anything happened, they would be blamed. So you must have come across that concern as well.
Not really. I have a lot of faith. Yeah. I have a lot of faith, and so not necessarily.
Well, that's excellent. See, that again talks to a change in attitude, talks to a change in the community's view of having going back to our ways of having children and recognizing a woman's autonomy. Does any of this I suppose it would have to when you're doing your artwork. This must impact the work that you do.
Hmm.
How do you see it being expressed?
Um, I had done a performance at the Indigenous Poundmakers Indigenous Performance Art Festival, um, which is which was created and hosted by Floyd Favel on the Poundmaker Reserve. And I believe it was the first time that I was there. Did a performance called Esquewak Iguanipi, Women and Water. Yeah, some of the thoughts behind it are directly because the performance art that I do is a bit more conceptual, so it has to do with meaning and thought and interpretation. But some of my own thoughts behind it are directly linked to the teachings of women's teachings, and so I see over time the influence that my experiences have on what I create.
It's been such a pleasure talking to you. Your journey has been so profound. You know, you, that you've gone down this road, that you continue. Where are you going to go from here? What do you think?
It teeters. I mean, I had to take a. I'm thinking film. There was a turning point in making that decision because I was working as a doula on my reserve, and for the longest time, like I had mentioned, I was learning how to live off of the land, and with a deep understanding of why that's so important, and my own understanding, well, not my own understanding, my knowing of what my purpose is, because I was able to gain that through learning what my clan is, through different paths that took me to working with women in my community. So I really felt that I was living in purpose and giving to my community, which has always been so important to me. But at the same time, I was also faced with the realities of living on a reserve, which means for me, a lack of family support, a bit more struggle of creating an income for myself, not necessarily having easy access to good foods. And because I'm still building a foundation for myself, it was really difficult for me to continue giving to other people when I didn't have a solid foundation for myself and a solid support group. And so I was grappling with that struggle of, well, this is the way that I really feel like I should be living, and I feel like I'm being in purpose. I feel like I'm living in accordance to natural law. I feel like I'm, being in service, which I really value. But on the other hand, there's so much. There's another part of myself that is. I was gonna say another part of myself that's really talented.
That's right.
But
Absolutely.
but just very creative. When I was younger, my mom was very supportive of those endeavors, of putting me into acting, of putting me into dance, of putting me into modeling, of putting me into singing. I know that because a bit of my mom, somehow able to just get things done. And I know that if I had continued to live with her, that would have been my path of being in those industries. And part of me felt like that was taken away from me, because from that age of 11 up until recently, I guess, that wasn't pursued necessarily as much as it had been when I was younger. At least not in a professional way. Like I was always doing art, but yeah, there's those parts of me that still, for example, want to get into acting, and I still have plenty of ideas for screenplays, and so I decided to pursue it in order to give that to myself because I can now.
Makes total sense. You have that foundation now of your culture and belief system, and you need it. Like I know myself, that was something I craved all my life, and now to be able to incorporate all of that and incorporate all pieces, all parts of yourself. Are you planning on going to school, or are you going to be taking different, like sometimes there's internships or there's programs through artist-run centers, or sometimes it's just a matter of doing whatever you can with whatever you have.
I am at UBC now. I'm finishing my degree in a year. So that's why I decided to go back to finish my undergrad, because I left to go do all my traveling and learning, because what I was learning in university wasn't what I wanted to be learning. So I decided to go back to finish my undergrad, which I'm doing currently. And the idea right now is to go study screenwriting so I could produce Indigenous screenplays for that to be in the mainstream film media.
Excellent. Have you thought about Capilano? They've got an Indigenous program over there. That's Vancouver. Yeah, you're Vancouver. Are you Vancouver? Yeah.
Yeah, I'll probably be going down to the States.
What's your degree in?
I do interdisciplinary studies, so I get to tailor my degree. So the title of my studies is Indigenous Fine Arts and Mass Media.
Wow, that's amazing. And you're like it's you do you have a lot of Indig teachers?
Within the First Nations Indigenous Studies faculty, there's Indigenous instructors that I've been able to make relationships with. With universities, there's always going to be some sort of complications. In Western universities, there's always going to be some sort of complications or dissonance between what we're studying and I don't know, the embodiments or the practice or what's actually happening.
I know exactly what you mean. There's that dissonance. It's a tough one to overcome. It's like you have a choice. Are you focus on your work or focus on the system? When I was doing my master's, I just kept my head down and finished my work. Like I just tried to get done. My priority is the community, not the institution. So there's that, and how things are taught, and what things are taught, as opposed to making sure that that there is a space for our culture and our knowledge to be passed on in a way that is respectful of our culture and knowledge, and not just taken and swallowed up by the university.
The only way that I could think about it is creating like little hubs on the university that are Indigenous owned.
Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing so much of your life with us. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. It's not an easy thing to do, and I've learned a lot from you today.
Oh, nice. Well, thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed having this talk, and I'm, like I said, it's really awesome when those little coincidences happen, and I'm happy that we were able to connect.
Thanks. Big Witch.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.